The Cold War vault was built to be uncrackable, but Elias didn't need a drill. He had Kaiser. With a single command, "Listen," the shepherd heard the tumblers fall where a human heard only silence. But the moment the heavy steel door swung open, the power lines were cut. The hunters had arrived. And this time, they didn't bring guns. They brought a weapon specifically designed to break the dog. The rain had been falling over the Cascade Mountains of Washington State for 3 relentless days. It was a cold, gray deluge that turned the dirt roads into rivers of mud and shrouded the towering pines in a thick, suffocating mist. Elias Thorne sat on the covered porch of his cabin, the damp cold seeping into his bones. He was a man of 42, though the harsh lines etched into his weathered skin made him appear older. His short, salt and pepper hair was messy, and a few days of graying stubble covered his jaw. He wore a worn-out, heavy-duty dark brown canvas work jacket over a faded red flannel shirt, and his durable blue jeans were stained with the clay of the mountain. Elias was a former scout sniper, a man who had learned the hard way that silence was often safer than noise. In his calloused hands, he turned over a tarnished silver medal. It had belonged to his grandfather, Silas Thorne. Elias closed his eyes, the sound of the rain fading as a memory surfaced from 30 years prior. He could still hear the old man's gravelly voice, speaking low as they walked through these very woods. "The forest hides things, Elias," Silas had said, his eyes scanning the tree line with a paranoia the young boy had not understood then. "Some things are buried not to be hidden, but to be imprisoned." A low, vibrating sound brought Elias back to the present. It was not the thunder, but a deep, guttural whine coming from his feet. Kaiser, a magnificent 4-year-old German shepherd, stood beside the rocking chair. The dog was large and imposing, with a thick coat of unique silver and gray fur that seemed to blend into the misty twilight. Kaiser was a retired military working dog, discharged like his master, with invisible scars. He did not bark at the storm. Instead, he held a calm, watchful posture, his amber eyes fixed intensely on the ridge behind the cabin. Suddenly, a deep, tearing sound echoed from the hillside, like the earth itself was groaning in pain. The ground beneath the porch trembled. Elias stood up, wincing as weight fell on his bad leg. Through the veil of rain, he saw the slope behind the house give way. A massive section of the hill slid downward in a slurry of mud and uprooted trees, crashing into the valley below with a dull, heavy thud that shook the cabin's foundations. "Stay close," Elias commanded softly. He grabbed a flashlight and a heavy crowbar from his tool bench. Kaiser moved instantly to his left heel, his body tense and ready. They navigated the slick mud toward the scar the landslide had left on the earth. Where the soil had sheared away, something unnatural protruded from the clay. It was not a rock, but a flat, rusted steel surface. Kaiser approached the object but stopped 3 feet away. The dog did not bark. Instead, he lowered his head, his nose working furiously as he inhaled the scent escaping from a gap in the metal. The fur along his spine stood up in a rigid ridge. He let out a sharp, anxious huff, looking back at Elias with a clear warning in his eyes. He smelled something old, stale, and metallic. Elias wiped the mud from the object. It was a heavy steel hatch, industrial and foreboding. He wedged the crowbar into the seam. With a grunt of exertion that strained his shoulder, he leveraged his weight against the bar. The hinges shrieked in protest, a high-pitched grinding of metal against rust before the door gave way, revealing a dark, gaping maw leading into the earth. The smell that drifted up was suffocating, a mix of damp concrete, mildew, and the heavy silence of a time long past. Elias clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, revealing concrete steps descending into a small, bunker-like room. It was an office, frozen in time. A calendar on the wall read 1963. In the center of the room stood a heavy metal desk covered in a thick layer of gray dust. Behind it sat a massive mechanical floor safe, its dial silent and locked. Elias descended the stairs, his boots crunching on the grit. Kaiser followed, his claws clicking softly on the concrete, checking the corners of the room with professional efficiency. On the desk, undisturbed for decades, lay a leather-bound diary. Elias picked it up. The leather was cold and cracked. He opened it to the final entry, recognizing the sharp, angular handwriting of his grandfather immediately. If you are reading this, the entry began. The ink faded, but legible. It means the debt has finally passed to you. I am sorry, Elias. Blackwood thinks I destroyed it, but I kept it here. This is my life insurance, and now it is your burden. I have left you a ghost, not a fortune. The wind howled outside the open hatch, but in the bunker, the silence was absolute and terrifying. Elias looked at the locked safe, then at the loyal dog standing guard at his side. The landslide had not just revealed a room, it had opened a grave. The storm outside had reduced to a steady, rhythmic drumming against the roof, but the atmosphere inside the cabin remained heavy. Elias sat at his small kitchen table, the only light coming from the glow of his laptop screen. The internet connection in the mountains was temperamental, yet he had managed to find what he was looking for. The name Voke appeared repeatedly in his grandfather's diary, always written with a shaky hand. A quick search revealed an article titled "The Stolen Patents of the 1960s" by Elena Voke. She was 30 years old, an investigative archivist known for unearthing corporate corruption. Elias stared at her author photo, a woman with sharp, determined eyes. He typed a short email, attached a photo of the diary page, and hit send. 6 hours later, the sound of tires crushing wet gravel echoed through the yard. Elias grabbed his cane and limped toward the front door. Beside him, Kaiser was already moving. The silver and gray German shepherd pushed open the screen door with his nose and bounded onto the porch. A silver sedan had pulled up near the muddy track. As the driver's door opened, Kaiser sprinted down the steps. He did not attack, but he moved with the formidable speed of a missile. He stopped 5 feet from the car door, blocking the path. A sharp, commanding bark erupted from his chest, followed by a second one. It was a warning, clear and disciplined. "Stand down, Kaiser," Elias called out, his voice low but firm. The dog instantly ceased his noise. He took one step back and sat in the mud, his body still rigid, his amber eyes locked on the stranger. A woman stepped out of the car. It was Elena Voke. She wore a practical dark green raincoat and heavy boots. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face. She looked at the massive dog blocking her path, then up at Elias on the porch. She did not look afraid, but she was certainly calculating the risk. Elias signaled her to approach. As she walked past Kaiser, the dog stretched his neck forward. He inhaled deeply near the hem of her coat, his black nose twitching. Suddenly, Kaiser let out a sharp sneeze and turned his head away, shaking his fur as if trying to dislodge a scent. Elias noted the reaction. It was not aggression, it was distaste. As Elena stepped onto the porch, the faint, acrid smell of old paper and chemical preservatives drifted from her clothes, the scent of a life spent in deep archives. Kaiser had confirmed she was exactly who she claimed to be. Inside the cabin, the air was warm from the wood stove, but the tension was ice cold. Elena did not sit down. She stood by the table, her arms crossed defensively. "You bring me all the way out here with a cryptic email," she said, her voice hard. "What is this about, Mr. Thorne? Do you want money? Are you looking to sell a story to the highest bidder? Because if you think you can ransom my family's history, you are mistaken." Elias did not defend himself. He understood her anger. To her, he was just the grandson of the man who had ruined her family. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out the leather-bound diary. He opened it to the marked page and slid it across the wooden table. "Read it," Elias said softly. Elena hesitated, then looked down. Her eyes scanned the faded ink where Silas Thorne had written about his regret, about the debt he owed, and the ghost he had left behind. The hardness in her face began to fracture. She traced the handwriting with a trembling finger, realizing this was not a ransom note, but a confession. "I thought he was a monster," she whispered, her voice losing its edge. "He was a man who made a terrible choice," Elias replied, "and he left us the bill." Before she could respond, Kaiser stood up abruptly from his spot by the fire. His claws clicked on the wooden floor as he walked to the window facing the dark forest. The fur along his spine rose in a jagged line. He stared into the pitch-black night, his ears swiveling forward, tracking something Elias could not hear. A low, vibrating growl rumbled in the dog's chest, deep and menacing. "What is it?" Elena asked, looking alarmed. Elias moved to the window and peered out. He saw nothing but rain and shadows, yet he knew better than to doubt the dog. Kaiser was not looking at a deer or a coyote. His gaze was fixed upward, tracking a mechanical hum that was barely audible over the wind. Someone was watching them. The morning sun struggled to break through the lingering gray clouds, casting a pale, washed-out light over the muddy yard. The storm had passed, but the air remained thick with moisture and unease. Elias stood on the porch, a mug of black coffee in his hand, watching a vehicle approach up the winding dirt track. It was not a truck or a local sheriff cruiser. It was a sleek, black luxury sedan, its polished paint gleaming incongruously against the backdrop of wild pines and wet clay. The car navigated the ruts with a smooth, silent precision that spoke of expensive engineering. The car stopped and the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Sterling Blackwood was a man who wore authority like a second skin. In his late 40s, he was impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than Elias's truck. His shoes were polished leather, completely impractical for the terrain, yet he stepped into the mud without a flinch. His face was handsome but cold, with eyes that assessed the value of everything they touched. He carried no weapon, only an aura of absolute confidence. Elias set his mug on the railing. Beside him, Kaiser stood up from his resting spot. The dog did not bark. He trotted down the steps with a stiff, formal gait, his tail held low. Blackwood stopped a few yards from the porch, his gaze flicking briefly to the massive German shepherd before locking onto Elias. "Mr. Thorne," Blackwood said, his voice smooth and practiced, "I trust you received my card." Elias did not offer a hand. "What do you want, Blackwood?" "I am here to make you a very generous offer," Blackwood replied, gesturing to the expanse of forest around them. "My company is looking to acquire this land for a comprehensive ecological preservation project. We are prepared to pay $5 million, cash. That is 10 times the market value." Kaiser moved closer to the stranger. The dog extended his neck, sniffing intently at Blackwood's trousers and shoes. Blackwood stood perfectly still, though his jaw tightened slightly. Kaiser inhaled deeply, taking in the scent of the man. Suddenly, the dog let out a sharp, loud sneeze, shaking his head vigorously as if trying to expel a noxious odor. He turned his back on Blackwood and trotted away to the far side of the porch, lying down with a heavy sigh of disinterest. He had smelled the cloying sweetness of expensive cologne and the chemical tang of city life, and he had found it repulsive. Elias watched the dog's reaction. "The land is not for sale," he said flatly. "Not for $5 million, not for 50. Blackwood's pleasant expression did not change, but the temperature in the air seemed to drop. He took a step closer, his voice losing its polished veneer and taking on a harder, more jagged edge. "You are a stubborn man, Elias, just like Silas." "Leave my grandfather out of this," Elias warned. "Why?" Blackwood asked, his eyes narrowing. "Do you think he was a saint? Do you think he was a hero protecting a secret?" "He was a good man," Elias said, though his grip on the porch railing tightened. "He was a leech," Blackwood spat, the venom finally breaking through. "For 20 years, Silas Thorne used those stolen patents to blackmail my father. He bled our family dry to build this little kingdom of yours." "My father did not die of a heart attack, Mr. Thorne. He took his own life because the debt your grandfather hung around his neck became too heavy to bear." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. The image of the honorable soldier he had worshipped began to crack, replaced by the image of a man capable of prolonged cruelty. The diary entry about the debt suddenly took on a sickening new meaning. Blackwood straightened his jacket, regaining his composure. "I am not here to rob you, Elias. I am here to reclaim what was stolen from my family. I am balancing the ledger." "Get off my land," Elias whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and shame. Blackwood nodded slowly, a cold smile touching his lips. "I will leave. But be careful, Mr. Thorne. This infrastructure is old. The wiring is faulty. Accidents happen in these mountains all the time, especially in the dark." He turned and walked back to his car. The engine purred to life, and the sedan reversed down the drive, leaving Elias standing alone with a legacy that felt heavier by the second. That night, as Elias and Elena sat in the kitchen reviewing the documents, the lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely. The hum of the refrigerator ceased. The cabin was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The hunt had begun. The darkness in the cabin was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that seemed to press against Elias's chest. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, and the rain hammered against the roof with renewed fury, drowning out all other sounds. "We have to go down," Elias said, his voice rough. "If Blackwood cut the power, he is not planning to wait until morning." Using tactical flashlights, Elias and Elena made their way out into the storm and down into the open maw of the bunker. The heavy steel door groaned as Elias pulled it shut behind them, muffling the roar of the storm, but not silencing it. The air inside was cold and stale, smelling of damp earth and secrets. The beam of Elias's light cut through the gloom, landing squarely on the massive iron safe behind the desk. It was a relic from a different era, a mechanical fortress built to withstand nuclear fire. "Do you know the combination?" Elena asked, shivering slightly in her damp coat. "No," Elias admitted. He knelt before the safe, pressing his ear against the cold metal door. He began to turn the dial slowly, his fingers trembling slightly. He was trying to listen for the subtle friction of the tumblers falling into place, the faint mechanical heartbeat that would reveal the code. But it was useless. The drumming of the rain on the earth above and the pounding of his own heart created a wall of white noise. He spun the dial in frustration. It was impossible. Then he felt a warm breath on his neck. Kaiser had moved silently to his side, his amber eyes reflecting the harsh light of the torch. Elias looked at the dog. Kaiser possessed senses that had been honed on the battlefield, ears capable of distinguishing the snap of a twig from the rustle of the wind 100 yards away. "Kaiser," Elias whispered, "listen." The command was familiar. The dog's ears swiveled forward, cupping the air. His body went rigid, every muscle coiled in concentration. He moved his head closer to the safe, his black nose almost touching the dial. Elias began to turn the dial again, agonizingly slow. He watched the dog, not the lock. Silence stretched in the bunker. Elias rotated the dial clockwise. 10, 20, 30. Suddenly, Kaiser's left ear twitched sharply. A low, barely audible whine vibrated in his throat. Elias stopped instantly. He checked the number. 32. He reversed direction, turning counterclockwise. He passed 0. He passed 50. Kaiser remained statue still. As the dial hit 67, the dog tilted his head sharply to the right. Elias stopped. He looked at Kaiser, whose eyes were fixed intently on the mechanism, waiting. "One more," Elias breathed. He turned the dial clockwise again. The silence was heavy, the tension pulling tight across Elias's shoulders. He spun past 10, past 20. At 24, Kaiser let out a sharp huff of air and tapped his paw on the concrete floor. Elias gripped the heavy iron handle and pulled. With a deep, resonant clunk that echoed off the concrete walls, the locking bolts retracted. The heavy door swung open on well-oiled hinges. Inside, there were no stacks of cash or gold bars. There was only a metal canister, sealed against the elements. Elias opened it with shaking hands and pulled out a spool of microfilm and a sheaf of documents preserved in acetate. Elena shone her light on the papers as Elias held them up. They were dated October 1963. Elias read the first document and then the second. His breath hitched in his throat. These were not just patents. They were police reports, falsified witness statements, and a confession signed under duress. "He didn't just steal the idea," Elias whispered, his voice sounding hollow in the small room. "He framed your grandfather's brother. He created a fake alibi for a crime Blackwood's father committed, and he used it as leverage. He didn't protect this secret to save the family honor. He kept it to bleed the Blackwoods dry. The image of the noble grandfather Elias had mourned and idolized shattered into dust. Silas Thorne was not a guardian, he was a blackmailer. The legacy Elias had been fighting to protect was nothing but a monument to greed and cruelty. Elias slumped back against the cold concrete wall, the documents slipping from his fingers to the floor. The weight of the shame was crushing. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "I am protecting a criminal," he choked out. Elena knelt beside him. She did not speak. She simply placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of shared burden. But it was Kaiser who moved first. Sensing the sudden collapse of his master's spirit, the great silver dog stepped forward. He lowered his massive head and pressed it firmly against Elias's chest, pushing hard, demanding to be felt. He began to lick the tears that leaked through Elias's fingers, his rough tongue warm and grounding. Kaiser did not care about patents or blackmail or the sins of the past. He only knew that his pack leader was in pain, and he would not leave him to face the darkness alone. Anchored by the weight of the dog against him, Elias finally drew a breath. The revelation in the safe had left them stunned, but the sudden sound of heavy boots striking the metal stairs above snapped them back to reality. The storm outside had masked the approach of the intruders, but now the enemy was inside the perimeter. "They are here," Elias whispered, extinguishing his flashlight. "Get behind the desk." He pulled Elena into the shadows of the bunker's far corner. Kaiser moved with them, his body low to the ground, a low rumble vibrating in his chest that Elias felt more than heard. 3 beams of high-intensity light cut through the darkness as the intruders descended. They were dressed in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by masks. They did not carry firearms, but in their hands, long stun batons crackled with arcs of blue electricity, the sharp snap of the voltage echoing off the concrete walls. "Secure the package," the lead intruder commanded, his voice distorted by the mask. "Neutralize the dog." One of the men raised a small, box-like device and pressed a button. Instantly, the air in the bunker seemed to shatter. To Elias and Elena, it was a faint, annoying hum, but to Kaiser, it was an agonizing assault. The German shepherd let out a high-pitched yelp of pain that tore at Elias's heart. The dog shook his head violently, pawing at his ears, his equilibrium destroyed by the ultrasonic waves. The disciplined guardian dissolved into a confused, whimpering animal, retreating into the corner, trying to escape the invisible torture. "No!" Elias roared. Abandoning his cover, Elias lunged forward to shield his dog. He grabbed a marine distress flare from his belt, a relic from his service days he kept in the bunker's emergency kit. He struck the cap. A blinding magnesium red light exploded in the confined space. The intensity was searing, washing out the intruder's night vision and filling the room with choking red smoke. The men shouted, stumbling back, blindingly shielding their eyes. "Now, Elena!" Elias shouted. Elena saw her chance. While the men were disoriented by the crimson glare, she spotted the man holding the ultrasonic emitter. She grabbed the heavy steel crowbar Elias had used to open the hatch and swung it with all her strength. It connected with the device, shattering the plastic casing. The high-pitched electronic whine cut out instantly. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and red-tinted. Kaiser shook his head once, then twice. The pain was gone. The confusion vanished. The whimper in his throat was replaced by a deep, feral snarl. The predator had returned. "Take them down," Elias commanded. Kaiser launched himself from the shadows like a silver blur. He did not go for the kill. He went for control. He hit the leader of the group with the force of a battering ram, knocking the wind out of him. As the man flailed, trying to bring his stun baton to bear, Kaiser's jaws clamped down on his wrist. The man screamed as the pressure crushed the nerves in his forearm. The baton clattered to the floor. Kaiser released him immediately and spun around, barking with a ferocity that shook the walls, daring the other 2 men to move. Elias stepped forward into the red haze, picking up the dropped baton. He stood beside his dog, his shoulder bleeding slightly from where he had grazed the wall during the chaos. "Drop them," Elias ordered, his voice cold. The 2 remaining mercenaries looked at their fallen leader, then at the snarling silver beast whose teeth were bared in the red light. They dropped their weapons, raising their hands in surrender. From the top of the stairs, a new sound drifted down, not the wind, but the distinct rising wail of sirens. Elena lowered the crowbar, her chest heaving. "I called the sheriff on the satellite phone before we came down," she said, her voice trembling but triumphant. "They are here." Elias placed a hand on Kaiser's head. The dog leaned against his leg, still watching the prisoners, but his tail gave a single, slow wag. The siege was broken. The flashing red and blue lights of the sheriff cruisers painted the wet pine trees in a chaotic, strobing rhythm. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and absolute. Sterling Blackwood was led out of the cabin in handcuffs. His expensive charcoal suit was muddied, and his hair, usually perfectly styled, plastered to his forehead. He did not look like a titan of industry anymore. He looked small and defeated. As the deputies guided him toward the patrol car, Blackwood stopped. He turned his head, his eyes finding Elias standing on the porch. There was no remorse in his gaze, only a deep, simmering hatred. "You are a fool, Thorne," Blackwood hissed, his voice rough with venom. "You think this makes you noble? You just burned down your own inheritance? You are exactly like your grandfather, a traitor to your own blood." Elias stepped forward, leaning heavily on his cane. Kaiser stood beside him, silent and watchful, but the fur on his neck was smooth. The threat was neutralized, and the dog knew it. "No," Elias said, his voice calm and carrying clearly across the yard. Silas chose to hide the truth in the dark to protect himself. I chose to bring it into the light. That is the difference. Blackwood sneered, but before he could respond, the deputy nudged him forward. The car door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the valley. As the convoy drove away, disappearing down the winding mountain road, Elias felt a physical weight lift from his shoulders. The air, once thick with the smell of ozone and old secrets, finally smelled clean. 1 month later, the morning sun broke over the ridge, bathing the Washington mountains in a warm, golden light. The gray mist that had choked the valley for weeks was gone, replaced by a sky of piercing blue. Elias stood before the bunker. It no longer looked like a scar on the earth. The heavy, rusted steel hatch was gone. In its place, Elias had installed a reinforced glass door framed in treated cedar. Sunlight poured down the concrete stairs, illuminating the space that had once been a tomb of guilt. Inside, the damp smell of mildew was gone, replaced by the scent of fresh pine and earth. The metal desk and the ominous safe had been removed. The shelves were now lined with crates of apples from the orchard and bottles of wine. It was a root cellar now, a place of sustenance, not secrets. Elena Volk stood beside him, shielding her eyes from the sun. The past month had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings and press conferences. The microfilm had been published, and the Volk family name had been restored in the history books. The fortune Blackwood had built on stolen foundations was being dismantled by the courts, and Elias had signed over every cent of the Thorne family's ill-gotten royalties to a scholarship fund for underprivileged engineers. "It looks different in the light," Elena said, smiling. "It feels different," Elias replied. He looked toward the grassy slope near the tree line. Kaiser was there. The magnificent silver and gray German shepherd was rolling on his back in the tall grass, his legs kicking in the air, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his belly. He looked nothing like the weaponized guardian who had fought in the dark. He looked like a dog who had finally found peace. Suddenly, a squirrel darted across the lawn. Kaiser scrambled to his feet, letting out a playful, excited yelp, and gave chase, his tail wagging furiously as he bounded toward the trees. Elias laughed, a sound that felt rusty but good in his throat. He sipped his coffee, watching his friend run. He realized then that his grandfather had been wrong. A legacy was not what you found buried in the ground, and it was not the blood in your veins. A legacy was the choice you made when the storm came. It was the decision to stand firm when it would be easier to run. Elias turned back to the house, his heart full. He had lost a fortune, but he had reclaimed his name. And as Kaiser trotted back to him, panting and happy, Elias knew he had everything he needed. Sometimes the best guide out of the dark is a loyal friend with a wet nose and a brave heart. We cannot choose the history we inherit, but we can always choose to face it with honor, especially when a loyal friend walks beside us. Kaiser and Elias remind us that the greatest treasure isn't buried in the ground, but found in the beating heart of a companion. If this journey touched your soul, please subscribe to help us tell more of these stories and let us know your thoughts below. Your next adventure is waiting on the screen right now, so click to follow the trail.